All right, well, we can go ahead and get started. I'm going to shut that door, actually. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for choosing this session here this afternoon. So we are joined by Katherine Wyrosdick and Carey. They are both coming to us from the city of Erie, and Winnie Branton, the founder of Branton Strategy. So they're just going to be discussing really how to gather and analyze data and using it strategically to fight blight. So we'll go ahead and take it away.
Sure. I'm going to stand up because I am a short person, and I like to see everybody. And I have the great pleasure of just being like the moderator. So I have some questions that I may ask Kathy and Erin as we go through, but we really want you to ask questions. So as we go through, if there's any time when you want to ask a question, just raise your hands and we'll get to you, okay? So I want to start by just saying that the key critical piece of being able to deal with blight is understanding the nature and extent of blight in your community before you can develop any kind of strategy. We heard that from the opening session and then the one that I was just in here on with the developers. And that was really, really interesting. So what data do you collect, right? We saw they were talking about property conditions and tax delinquencies and all kinds of data that you can collect. But what are the key ones that you want? Well, Kathy and Erin are going to share what they did in the city of Erie, and you're going to be blown away by their presentation, and then how you, no matter what size your community is and what resources you have, you're going to be able to take away from today's presentation things that you can go back and use in your own community to help you get a handle on the nature and extent of blight in your community. So I'm going to sit down, turn it over to you guys, and then we'll get going.
Thanks, Winnie. So I want to, before we kind of go through some of our slides, and we have some pictures just to kind of break up the, so you just kind of see what we're producing. I want you to know that before, just to kind of go back, everything you see that we've been able to do, we started with nothing. So if you're going back to a small borough or township and say, well, we can't do that because we don't have GIS or we don't have the staff or we don't, I can assure you, everything that we've done here started 4.5 years ago with zero budget. So I'm going to, and we probably won't have time to really talk about, well, how did you do, what was your first step? And I would love to say I had it all planned out and it worked out for me. I saw this vision. It absolutely did not. I had no idea how I was going to start this work, but I just knew it had to get done. The reason I knew is before moving to Erie County, I was in Fairmont, West Virginia as a planning director, and I worked with the zoning and code office. And what we were doing way back when, back in 2012, 2013, or 2013, the Northern West Virginia Brownfields Assistance Center, which is a thing that we have in West Virginia, one's housed at WVU, one's housed at Marshall, they were working on this bad buildings program, and they wanted a guinea pig community. They said, we think we need to do a blight assessment. We need to do this survey work. And I'm like, yeah, we don't have any money in Fairmont either, so come in and let's figure that out. And they did, and we did we had the hard copy surveys, and we went out with volunteers and figured out what every house was, with the state of every home. We didn't have GIS, they did the GIS for us, so we had maps. But that turned into every city council member who was running for election that year had that map in their hand. So you want to talk about how data can drive policy? That's how it happened. So everyone who was elected, there were 12 candidates running for 5 seats, God help us, that's a terrible year in Fairmont. But they all knew, they're running on, there's 400 properties here, I'm running on doing something with these 400 properties. So when they were elected, they were able to earmark funding for those 400 properties. It took a long time. So that carried me forward into where I am now, which is the city of Erie. And the city of Erie is a lot like Fairmont, but bigger, 98,000-ish people in the city, and we have tremendous blight. We have tremendous disinvestment, high concentrations of poverty, worst city in America for African Americans. I mean, the list goes on and on. We're not swimming in luxury in Erie. So what we wanted to do, I was hired 4.5 years ago as the city's very first planner. They didn't have a planning department at the time. And and then now we have a planning and neighborhood resources department where zoning, code enforcement, and planning are all under one umbrella. But when I started, I was a planner, and I had no staff, and I had no budget, except for my salary. So when I tell you, you can start from nothing and build into something, we can figure that out for you. But what they did have is what I mentioned during our opening of events discussion, is they had just finished a comprehensive plan called Erie Refocused. This plan, this is an example of how this plan laid out. It's done completely, it was based completely on a housing assessment, property condition survey of the entire city of Erie. So about 33,000 parcels were surveyed, and they were ranked from being in excellent condition to unsound, 1 through 5. It's unfortunate. I would not recommend that you use red as your worst. Really harkens back to redlining days, and we got a lot of that when these maps came out. But it did show high concentrations of where the blight was. And you can see this is we call this our dinosaur house. This house had a tree fall on it, and it sat there for 5 years before it could actually get taken, like that. So that's a big chunk out of that house. Okay. And so what we were able to do with the comprehensive plan is the CZB, sorry, I thought someone was asking a question. They had done the assessment, then they broke the city out into 17 planning areas based on sort of the health of each community. Not every community. This is what we call West Bayfront. It's actually in pretty good shape. It's where Gannon University is located. So we have a lot of student housing, so you get some problems. It's not the worst of the worst. But it does, the comprehensive plan said, here's the starting point based on that neighborhood and the conditions. If it was a thriving, fairly good, affluent neighborhood, we started talking about proactive code enforcement. You just need code enforcement to go out there and get the 1 or 2 that are in decline and stop it before it gets too bad. In East Bayfront, which is the Lower East Side, it has incredible amounts of blight and high concentrations of abandonment. The comprehensive plan said, so bad, so bad, you should just bulldoze 2 blocks and turn it into a park. And so we said, all right, maybe we can do that. I don't know where we're going to get the money. But what we did after that point is we went back into that neighborhood and we worked with the neighborhood groups. And we'll talk about how we actually worked with our neighborhood stakeholders to vet that idea. Like, this feels very urban renewal to me as a planner. And like, I don't want to go bulldoze blocks and blocks. People live there, and that would be insensitive and to the cultural context of that neighborhood. But what we did is we went back in and said, where is the blight specifically, and how do we work with you? Do you need green space? Do you need trails? Does this idea of a park make sense? And it actually did. But what it didn't do, it didn't make sense to take out blocks. It made sense to follow the blight, and it's a meandering greenway system that we have planned for the Lower East Side now. That's going to be well vetted or accepted by the people who live there because they helped us frame what it looks like. So this started the whole thing. And then what we did, it was just me, remember me, as the planner. I had no money. What did I do? Is I said, there's this great program called the VISTA program, AmeriCorps. I don't know if you've ever worked with AmeriCorps, they're fantastic. So what didn't cost me very much to get into the AmeriCorps system, and I knew I'd get one very bright person who just wanted to be a do-gooder in their lives for at least a year, and be a servant to their community. And this is my VISTA from 4 years ago.
Still here.
So, she's still here. And I said, what we need to do is we need to go back out. The challenge with the survey that CZB did is we didn't have a GIS system, so it was this static map. I said, you know what, we're going to do it again. But you know what, we're going to partner with our county GIS because they had GIS. And I said, how do we do this over again? But we'll start in the neighborhoods that we want to work in, like East Bayfront. Let's start there. And let's make sure that it's GIS based, even though we didn't have that system at the time. We do now, but we didn't. But we also don't have staff. So the VISTA's job was put this training program together. How do we train our volunteers who we know are going to be needed to do this work? So it took us about 2 years to fine tune, but we have a training manual that's geared to student interns and volunteers that's based on what the code enforcement officer goes out. So you're a property maintenance inspector. This training manual looks at everything that you would look at. And we actually did, and then we based the training, we vetted it and piloted it with our code enforcement officers. So this idea of proactive code enforcement that Erie Refocus said we do, the code officers are like, I don't have time. I'm reactive, right? I wait for the phone calls. I'm getting 10 phone calls a day that I have to go out and address. I don't have time to drive around and look for this stuff, which is what the survey tells you to do. So we used volunteers and the VISTA program to go out, and we used it in a GIS called a Survey 123 app. And you can see there's Erin and there's me and there's our volunteers. We used an app that they could download on their phone. And so anyone could walk around the sidewalk and they knew what to, it was drop down so that it was foolproof. Look at the porch. What state is the porch in? It's good, fair, it doesn't exist. Is the grass high? It was a drop down. So they couldn't mess it up pretty much. And then we had code officers go back out for the worst of the worst properties and make sure that they were the worst of the worst. So we weren't going to take action on those if they were just done by an intern. It gets very specific. You can see. You want to go to the next one.
So these are both examples of the training manual that we developed. The training manual in total is about 60 pages, and what we would do is then we would have a group of either neighborhood volunteers or, we had a new code enforcement officer that was just hired who would be doing some of the surveying work, or with our Gannon student workers, we would sit down with them. It would be about 4 hours where we would go through the whole manual and make sure everybody was on the same page in terms of vocabulary, in terms of what does vacancy actually mean. We had specific things that they're looking for. Like the gas meter, full mailbox, full mail, there's junk around the property that's boarded up. So we were going through each component of the survey with them and making sure that everybody understood what the difference is between something that just needs minor repairs versus something that needs major repairs. And we had text description and also photos so that when they're out in the field, then if they had a question, they could refer back and say, is the roof in major, does it need major repairs, does it need minor repairs? So we really had to kind of break down each component because they're college students, they're not used to looking at these parts of the house versus a code enforcement officer. That's their bread and butter. So these are more examples of things that we will go through during training. I kind of touched on, what the difference is between major repairs, minor repairs, those photos. We went through the anatomy of the house. We realized that some of our students didn't understand, what is a fascia, what is a soffit? These are not typical words that they're using in their college classes. So we wanted to make sure that everybody was on the same page. And then we would have them give an overall rating to the house. And this was the most subjective part of the survey just because, what is the difference between average and poor? It's going to be, dependent on who the surveyor is, but we tried to be as clear as possible based off of those ratings that they were giving to each component of the house. If the roof had major repairs, it was most likely that the house was going to be in either average, poor, or unsound condition. So we tried to guide them in a way that was the most, from point A to point B. If it's major repairs for every part of the house, it's probably poor or unsound, So we tried to be very specific with that. And then also gave them scenarios because people a bunch of college students standing on your front porch, or not your front porch, in front of your house on the sidewalk, can generally raise some questions, and people come out of their house and they want to know. So we made sure to give them talking points, giving them phone numbers of people at City Hall if the person has a specific question about something random like trash pickup or taxes, or everything would come up when you're talking to people on the front porch. So we made sure that they had specific scenarios that we knew would come up, and we knew that they had talking points, and also resources if someone was looking for assistance to help fix up their house. We gave them, housing resource brochure of organizations that were doing housing rehabilitation in the city.
And then we turned it into, because it's I just mentioned, and then I'll let Erin walk you through this. This is a dashboard that the county helped us develop, and now Erin is a pro because she's been self-taught on GIS since she started as the Vista. This is a dashboard of that condition survey, and it's based on every planning area that we just mentioned. The dots are kind of morphed together, but each parcel has a dot. Someone did ask that, I think it's a good question that was asked. We only use this internally. So you can't go to a public facing site and click on a property and understand what your property is ranked. One of the reasons we wanted to do that is it was really for internal purposes so we could sort of track progress, but we were also concerned that if someone is applying for a loan or is trying to get insurance, we were concerned that mortgage or loan officer or the insurance company could go to this site and say, oh wait, the city has this ranked as poor, and that concerns me, and I don't want to insure that property. So there was a lot of reasons why we just keep this internal, and we've been told that as long as it's not a document that you can reproduce, right to know does not you don't have to share the dashboard. So keep that in mind. And then Erin, we use this for so many different things than just planning. So Erin's going to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I'll just say too, to get from training to having 21,000 property surveys done, there was a lot of quality control that needed to happen, and we learned that very quickly. Once people are trained, especially those first couple surveys, those first days that they're out, I'm making sure that now we know, I have to be checking each one of those surveys that are coming back, especially in the beginning, because we need to have that constant feedback with the people who are new to doing the survey. So just so that we make sure everyone is on the same page, using the same, ranking system that we had talked about in training, giving them feedback when there's something, you're rating something as good and it's unsound, so there's a disconnect here. So we want to make sure we're giving that feedback to whoever's doing the survey so that they know.
Another interesting, we hadn't accounted for, talking about quality control, Gannon has a large international student population, so using international students who come from a community that was completely unknown to us in Erie, they have a completely different view of what unsound and good is. So that's another learning lesson that we learned. But you have to have quality control, and you have a Vista kind of monitoring, okay, what are they saying about this? And then sending code officers back out. I know we're going to end up going over time.
Yeah.
I'm holding my question.
Yeah.
So I guess to be able to get to this point then, we had GIS resources, like Kathy said, with our county planning department, and they're very helpful in sharing the data that they have, which is primarily the parcel information, which allowed us to be able to build this. So once we had all of the, the points, the addresses collected, we were able to then join that to our parcel information through GIS with the county's help. So that gives us an ability to do more analysis based around the assessed value of these properties. You can see in the bottom, you can see the assessed value going down as the condition also goes down. So that's an indicator to us that we're doing this is working. The condition and the value are decreasing at a similar rate. And we're also able to track ownership, so we can query. We have how many? 294 unsound properties. We can do a query on the ownership of each of those properties. Is there a common owner to some of these properties? Because that's a red flag to us. That's a red flag to the code enforcement office that we need to start some interventions. The dashboard is really helpful in being able, this is just a screenshot of the dashboard, but we can click on each slice of the pie chart and it can pull up just those things that we're looking at. So we can just look at unsound properties, and we can start to see concentrations on blocks. We can just look at rental properties. We could just look at unsound rental properties. Because the city has a rental registration program, we're able to also add that as another data source into our analysis here as well. So you can see, so this is just to show you the difference. We also, part of the question on the surveys is about vacancy. And it's a point in time, so it's not the property could be occupied now, but at least to give us a starting point to do some analysis on the state of vacant properties within the city. You can see that the condition has changed significantly to increase the unsound and poor properties that we've surveyed.
Excuse me, what software are you using?
Yeah, so this is all, we collect the information through an app called Survey 123, which is a product of Esri and ArcGIS. And then that information is fed directly into our ArcGIS Online account, which we can, this is also ArcGIS. This is a dashboard through the company Esri. So all of that information, the nice part about the app and the dashboard and ArcGIS Online, it's all integrated. So we don't have to be shifting between an Excel spreadsheet to a map to, you know, all these different softwares. Esri can allow us to integrate that.
And we, like I said, like we were saying, we use this, and we don't always have the dashboard open, right? We know these numbers like in our sleep. We know the vacant properties. We can go, and how important policy is. I can go to city council and say, look, you guys are, I do this often, you're asleep at the wheel. You don't understand the dollars that you're not putting towards demolition and blight. This is what it's costing you. We did a cost of blight report based on the city of Erie, based on those 458 vacant properties. Most of them, you can see, are unsound, not all of them. Most of them are poor. We did a calculation based on what we were able to do with the funding that we had in place. We have a land bank, we have a redevelopment authority. It would take us 28 years to deal with properties that we know exist when this was done. 28 years. Well, I'll talk a little bit about how we used our ARPA funding, our American Rescue Plan funding, to address some of it. That funding has reduced that 28 years by 3 years. It's great that we have it, but this problem is significant. And if you don't have policymakers who are understanding, and we can show them this right now, it's not me talking. I can like, look, this is what is on the ground today. Don't sit there and talk to me about one or two problems that you have. This is the problem that this city faces, and you can't deny it when it's like you look at this, right? I don't know if you've been to the city of Erie, you get it. Like, you see that red concentration, that yellow concentration, you see those numbers. We add dollar values to it, and it's compelling. $5.3 million a year between no taxes paid, the cost of code enforcement, the cost of the devalue of properties. $5.3 million, that's what it's costing us to do nothing, or to do very little. So how much is $1 million a year going to actually get us return on that investment? And that's what this kind of data, and that's really what we wanted to talk about, this kind of data works, or is why it's so important. And this is how we use it this is an example of one of our neighborhood strategic plans, where we work with the neighborhood group and say, look, we can't deal with all of these blighted properties. You tell us which ones and why are the most difficult, because someone's running it as a drug house, or people keep breaking into it. What we're able to do, and I'm going to just steal this from Erin, because I was going to let Erin talk about this, is we put it into a flow chart. We know which ones are vacant, okay, which ones are vacant, do they have any code action on them? If they don't have any code action, this is what we call proactive code enforcement. All right, we're going to go to the code officer and say, we've done the work, you need to start citing this property because it exists in space, but no one's calling you about it. Once it has code action, now it's ready for the blighted property review. So we actually just start marching it through the process of BPRC, get it declared blighted, get it in front of the redevelopment authority. So this chart allows us, based on that work with the neighborhood groups, how do we actually get it into the pipeline of some level of action in what we have in our toolbox. So this is what that shows. And then I keep going back. And then Erin works with the code office, and this shows that, if you want to talk a little bit more.
Yeah, so this is kind of like the living document to the plan that you just saw on the last screen. So the plan kind of gives us those initial priorities, and then this is kind of how we track where is it at today. So the plan says, here's how it was in 2018 when the plan is finished, and then we can update each of these columns. We have the address, the owner. If the ownership changes, it'll be updated in the spreadsheet. Vacancy, condition, and then, like Kathy was saying, the most recent violation notice, the most recent citation when it was taken to court, any other kinds of repair, demolish violations, and then when it was blighted by the blighted property. And then we also have notes so that we all are on the same, this is a large group of people. It's the redevelopment authority, it's planning, it's code enforcement, it's a neighborhood group, so we all want to make sure we're on the same page the last time anyone has had any contact.
Who maintains that? Is it, oh, you?
Yeah.
Okay, no, I was just
Yeah.
wondering, because that's a lot of information, especially for the code enforcement officer. So you're getting all the data and then you update, okay.
Yeah.
Right, yep.
We
So-
want the code enforcement officer to be out in the car, driving around, issuing the citations, and then she can just ask them the question, where are you with that?
Is that tied, oh sorry, is that tied to GIS, or how are you getting that updated property owner information?
Right now it's manual, which is like a hot mess. We're in the process of updating our technology right now. Yeah. So once the technology is updated, I'm hoping it can be more of an automatic update kind of process.
So our code enforcement software, how they track is probably like what you do. They have an Excel spreadsheet, they have a Word document, they have photos, and then they have this, the intake software. We're actually changing now to have an integrated, a GIS-based software program that will track all of that and update, link to the county's tax assessment data and update ownership.
Oh, I'll ask it later.
But it was not easy, so we had a question, and I think it went in the back too. Did you want to?
Are the properties that are sort of in this middle ground that have the potential to go
Yeah.
to one side, right? If there is an action.
The average
right,
could go good, or they could
a
go
little
forward.
bit right below that. I mean, in general, how much time, percentage-wise maybe, do you spend on the one end of the list versus trying to maybe think about the things in the middle so they don't end up on the red side, fall back? Yeah.
So that's a really good question, because the city doesn't have a lot of robust programs for housing rehab. We have CDBG, so we have CDBG programs that can help with some housing rehab. That's where that really plays a part is our neighborhood groups. So we have nonprofit neighborhood groups who do a lot with housing rehab, and they know the people better than we do who live in these houses. So they're the ones who can take that information and say, okay, those are the ones that we're going to do outreach to help repair the home, replace the roof, and that's how we're using it now.
Before it even gets
Before it goes, we want it to go. But we also know if you have an unsound property, that's highly unlikely that you're going to be able to get any return on investment if you try to get it even to a state of good repair. It's just not going to be. So those are almost always demolitions. But the poor ones, you can get them into a good state of repair, and you can actually put dollar amounts to it because of the data that we have. There was a question back here.
Kind of along those lines, when you declare it blighted, I mean, I feel like I know it when I see it, but is it the condition scale that declares it? Like, does it reach a certain, what defines?
Yeah, so we can't keep up with the ones that would qualify as blight, but it's condition, it's tax delinquency, the utilities have been shut off, and no response for code enforcement. Those are the key indicators, and we've got a list that we can check, and we can even get it declared blighted a little bit earlier than that. But the list is so long of the unsound properties that have not been declared blighted. There's no sense in kind of jumping ship. But anyway, it's official, and we have a BPR, a review commission that reviews the list, declares them blighted. It goes to the planning commission. They approve the blight declaration, and then the redevelopment authority can issue condemnation action and take it by eminent domain. That's really where we're hoping to spur action before that, but that's eventually where we can take it. And that's what this kind of shows, is that pipeline of how far we can push it.
I just wanted to comment on the notes, because to me, I've been trying to think more about occupied blighted and like the personal side of it, and hearing the opening speakers talk about how blight is personal. Here, this last one too, like she explained to me, over the last 2 years she's on the property, she's been traveling to Cleveland to care for a family member who's sick and has cancer. Like, you're not getting that kind of information unless you have your code enforcement folks and people like Erin really connecting with the property owners, which is very time consuming. Not easy to do, but this helps you deal with that human side of the occupied blighted that really is critical to building the public support and trust when you go in and try to do things in neighborhoods that have been forgotten for many years. I just wanted to point that out. I love that.
Code officers are frontline. They know they hear, that's who heard that.
They know
and
Doris.
They know Doris. So they're the ones who really help get ahead of this. And then, let me go to
So where, kind of where I wanted to take you. Lo and behold, we had a pandemic and everyone got shut down, and then the feds wanted to help communities rebound, and so they created the American Rescue Plan Act, which gave us local recovery funds. So the city of Erie was the third largest allocation in the state of Pennsylvania. I want to say that's a great thing, but it's really because the state of the city is so bad. That's what we needed the money for. We hit all the indicators. $76 million is what we got. It's almost an entire annual budget. I can tell you it has been the best of times, it has been the worst of times, trying to figure out how you're going to spend $76 million in 3 years or less. Well, because we had done all these plans, and as a planner, you have the vision, the goals, and you just are like, okay, one day we'll get the money, we hope we get the money. And then ARPA happened. So we finally had the money, and I'm like, I know what to do with it. I'm gonna put these plans, let me get them off the shelf. And that's what we did with housing programs. So everything you're asking is exactly what fed into our request for ARP housing funds. We asked for just over $15 million. These are the buckets, these are the programs to go to the City Redevelopment Authority. Most of these programs are actually new programs that didn't exist for housing. And so a lot of these are housing rehab. So we have increased blight removal, so demolition funding of $1.8 million. And I can tell you, because we did the survey and we did a blight study, I can tell you exactly how many properties will be demolished with that funding, pretty much on point. I can tell you exactly how many, this new housing production, that's actually another name for demolition, but we're trying to acquire vacant property in sufficient concentrations to make them redevelopable lots. So that's what that funding is going to. Rental investment program, our rental stock is horrific. But people need to be able to rent quality properties, so we've created a rental investment program. These are for the smaller 2 to 4 unit properties, which we have a ton of in the city of Erie. Homeowner rehab loan program, so small rehab program. So you can start actually stacking all of these because the funding is actually extremely flexible. It's not HUD funding. You can be extremely flexible. We have qualified census tracts, which if you're following ARPA means we can do a lot of different types of investments into QCTs that you don't have to show an impact to COVID because it's presumed, because they're the ones high poverty, low income. A small minority contractor incubator. So this is a small revolving loan fund for minority contractors. So they can get into the market and we can actually build contractors who can do the work for all the housing rehab that we know is coming down the pipeline. They just need access to quick capital, quick cash, to sort of float them through the initial projects, and that's what that's doing. Lead hazard control in healthy homes, we already have that program. And then a homeownership incentive program, so that's to help with PMI and down payment assistance, and then a $990,000 for housing actually those are for historic properties. So we're going to have a grant program for properties that are in our local historic districts and for housing rehab. Yes, sir.
So with all of those various programs, what type of a staff do you have, or how do you administer those programs?
All of this has administrative dollars, so they're actually ramping up their staff to handle these programs, and they're developing them now. And this is the Redevelopment Authority. This is not being done inside City Hall. It's being given to the Redevelopment Authority, and they're going to have to ramp up. I think it's 4 or 5 staff that they're going to be hiring over the next 4 years. But we want them, this is us launching, one's a revolving loan fund, so it will continue to come back to the Redevelopment Authority so they can continue to grow these programs. And that was intentional. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
I hope.
Thank you.
I have a question. Is the goal to eventually own some of these properties and rehab them? Or is it, like you're trying to cherry pick things? So, like we did a comp plan in Jeanette, and one of them was corridors, right? So, for Erie's example, if you're coming in from the Bayfront Connector on 6th Street and you see some properties, are you trying to pick some of those off and say, I want to rehab that, like to help the Lower East Side? Or is it more of like, you're trying to do more of these programs, which I think is great. Like you go down 6th Street, there's some very large mansions that have been broken out to like 8, 9, sometimes I've seen 10, unit apartments in these traditional mansions, Millionaires Row or whatever. So I think that's great. You have like programs to help, those people out. But what is the goal? Like, are you trying to acquire and rehab and sell, or is it more than that?
It's both. So the redevelopment authority is also the land bank. The land bank, our Erie County Land Bank is a unicorn. I don't know if you follow that. We get $1 million a year from our gaming revenue, and that was legislatively done. It happened. It was a Harrisburg miracle, and it's quite amazing. The city is lucky enough to get about half of that. Before we started pivoting the redevelopment authority and the land bank, they were just demolishing. They were acquiring, demolishing vacant property, maybe a side lot, but maybe 10-20% of their properties would actually go into the hands of someone else. Most of it just sat there as vacant lots. So this new housing production, that's what that's for. It's like, okay, we have these lots, how do we start cherry picking the ones that we could turn back into and hand over to a developer for new construction? But we now, because of between a land bank and a redevelopment authority, let's find the ones that you kind of saw earlier today that are salvageable and have the redevelopment authority be the developer, or put it into the hands of those neighborhood groups, because they too will, some of them are skilled enough to take those properties and redevelop them. But they could also tap into these buckets to do that. So it was a holistic approach.
Kathy, would you go to the next slide? Because the policy impacts to me are really important to try to figure out what you learned from the study and then how you're going to implement it.
So we talked a lot about all of these. Is we create a cost of blight for elected officials. So I can, if they come at me and say we don't need the money for this, I'll be like, nope, this is 2-pager. Yeah, we do. Remember the numbers I showed you. And that's what happened with ARPA. I mean, I tell you, that $15 million you think would be an easy sell, it was not. Everyone wanted to. They had their own ideas of where it should go, what it should be done. They didn't want the redevelopment authority to have it. They wanted it all to go to the neighborhood groups. I'm like, why would you decentralize it like that? Let's just put it in one entity. Rental registration. What we found during the survey is a lot of our rental properties that are supposed to be inspected every year are in horrific condition. And I'm like, guys, we gotta flip the lid on that and figure out why that's not meeting the goals that I envision for the rental registration program. So we're upending that right now as we speak. I talked about proactive code enforcement. Now we're able to do that, right? We weren't able to do that before, but because we have this survey work, we reorganized City Hall. It's now no longer just a planner and a Vista. We've reorganized. I'm the director of planning and neighborhood resources, which is code enforcement, zoning, and planning. Neighborhood resources is the name I gave my officers. I'm like, I don't want you to be enforcement all the time. Eventually, we're going to get you to where you can not only hand out the notice of violation, but you can hand a resource manual and say, here's where you can get funding to help. Because you saw Doris. Mike knows Doris. And Mike knows that she can't do anything to fix up her property. But now we have these buckets. We actually have resources for the first time. So in a perfect world, a year from now, we would be back here telling you, here's how it actually all worked well, because these things just happened over the past couple of years. And then we're looking at a vacant property registration. We're just now starting to look into that. And I think that's going to be another key to allow us to get into properties early, to see the leaky roof and try to do something about that.
And just a question about the implementation. Like, how do you hold your folks accountable? Like, is the property condition survey, is that updated over time? And do you report to council regularly on how this is being implemented? What's the plan to hold people accountable?
So we hold ourselves accountable first. So we're constantly pushing these policies forward. And I tell you, the code officers, they love this stuff. I mean, this is the first time they're like, we've been the redheaded stepchild of the City Hall for so long, and we love that people are coming to us and asking our opinion. They helped drive that $15 million. They were at the city council meeting advocating, saying, we know this is needed. So we hold ourselves accountable. Because we have done the due diligence to develop the training we've done and the property condition survey, right now it's static, but we now with the new code software, it's going to be much easier to update and maintain. We're going to be able to track where the violations, much easier. So if that hadn't been in place, our only other option was to do it all over again every 5 years, which we could do much easier now because the system's already built. But I think with the new software system with Code Office, it's going to be easier to update. We're not going to have to go back in droves and have everyone's Ring cameras go off when the students are in front of their house. I got a lot of pictures sent to me. Who is this woman? Like, she's fine, she's a student. It was mostly Erin. Thank you, I know we're over, so I appreciate. Did you want to ask any more questions?
No, are we over? I thought we were till 1.
Are we? No, I don't think we are, but that's fine.
Yeah, we're till 1.
Oh, are we?
Good.
Never mind. All right,
Yeah,
let's keep
I
going.
do have could you talk a little bit about or share a little bit more about how you advocated for the funding? Like you said, you took code enforcement folks there. You did your cost of blight study. And again, when we were planning for this, I said, can we share? So these guys are going to share their cost of blight study. How about the training manual?
Oh, yeah, you can have the training
manual if anybody wants to see that.
Yeah, you can absolutely have it.
So all that to me is just so great for the peer-to-peer stuff. But could you share a little bit more about how you convinced the electeds and people in power that you needed the $15 million?
So what we did is working with the redevelopment. So I also sit on the Redevelopment Authority board and the Land Bank board and the BPRC. So there's this, like, I never quite leave this whole thread. I can talk the talk, which helps. I'm not saying that everyone has the time to do that.
What's BPRC again?
Oh, Blighted Property Review Commission. Thank you for that. So what we did is we sat down with RACE, the Redevelopment Authority, and we came up with a very specific housing program. So not only did we ask for the money, but we said, in 3 years, here's what's going to happen with that. We're going to have 85 additional demolitions occur. We're going to have 180 homes remediated of lead paint. 60 to 70 vacant lots will be put back into productive reuse. They have about 140 vacant lots that they own right now that they can't do anything with. So we're going to put more of those back. 84 rental properties will be improved from poor condition to good condition. So we're so hyper, we can really do a fine-tuned measurement. 102 owner-occupied homes will be brought up to code through low-interest loan programs. 18 small and minority-owned contractors will get help. 84 families will become new homeowners. So if they, I mean, we were able to put a lot of numbers, and you can almost hold me to those numbers, because what did we do? We had all of the data. We know from the assessment of a poor home to the assessment of an excellent home, how much it takes to actually move from one condition to the next condition. And so that's how we were able to sell it. And then when we went to the code, when we went to council to ask for the funding, we had all of our neighborhood groups were there. They all spoke. We had our code officer, we had our demo coordinator, we had our redevelopment authority, we had PHFA came, and they spoke, and they said this is exactly what you need to be doing. So I wasn't standing. I said I can't stand up there alone. If I am, council's going to say we don't want to take your word for it. And they all spoke. They all had the same talking points, the same songbook, because the data's there and they know what it's. And she's been working with the neighborhood groups from day one. So there's so much trust built.
We were looking at it mirrored. We're asking for $50 million, but like Kathy had mentioned earlier, we're also losing $5 million based on all of these tax delinquency, unpaid rental inspection fees, code enforcement officers' time going out in the field, putting this through violation notice, citation, taking it to court, So we were able to quantify that and show, we're asking for $15 million, but we're losing, how much money out the back door every single year because of these other issues.
And I would say that I can sit up here and talk about, here's all of the things that we did to get here. 4 years ago, we had absolutely no idea where we were going to go. I'm like, I just want the data. And then once you get the data, you're like, oh, this is really interesting. Well, what if we did this? Well, what if we did this? And it just builds and builds and builds. 4 years ago, had I known what it was going to take to get here, I would have never started. So I'm just, I'm out. So I just wanted to tell you that you see all of this and say, oh, it's too overwhelming, we're not going to be able to do it. I'm like, you will. We started with hard copy surveys in West Virginia, and we built off that, and then we were able to figure out how to use a GIS database so we can build off of it. I had no money. If I can I had no money, and I got a Vista. So I'm just saying, don't give up. There's 2 questions. He had it, and I'll ask.
How have you navigated around politics and elected officials?
Alcohol. Like everyone else. I go home and I crack open a beer. It's really hard. It really kicks you in the gut and in other places. When you do all of this work, I thought there's an elected
I'm an
official.
elected official.
Oh, okay. Well,
I work with a lot of people that don't get it.
They don't get it, and that's the hardest part. The ones who don't ask questions, and you think, okay, you assume they're fine because they're not questioning you, and then you go to council and they beat you up. They try to pull it off the agenda. And I'm like, where is this coming from? Why would you have not picked up a phone? So communication, I just contact them if I know that I've got someone who's not who doesn't see, who doesn't understand. And you're going to have, and there's still to this day, there's this one guy who, he tried to kill it on Wednesday. He's like, I'm trying to undo everything you just did. I'm never going to get that one guy. But you know what? All I need is 4.
Well, you know how to count.
We have a council of 7. All I need is 4.
Well, there's a lot, like you have city, county, all the authorities, and then you have like the downtown partnership and like all these other things going on in town too.
Yeah,
so,
and there's a lot happening.
Yeah.
But I didn't have to, I don't have to get them on board.
Sounds like the county is willing to work with these. So is there a separate redevelopment authority for the county and the city? Then?
Yeah,
Okay.
and a separate land bank for
Yeah,
both.
separate land bank
Yeah.
for both too.
You had a question.
You were just talking, it's not really a question, it's kind of a shameless plug, but you were talking about starting and having the GIS system and getting going, and I just wanted to let everybody here know that the county does have a GIS system, and we do blight inventories just like that for some of our municipalities, so if you're interested at all and want to get the conversation started, the county planning department is here to help.
And that's where we went.
Thank you for that. That's a good
That's
point.
where we went.
Yeah.
In West Virginia, the county didn't have GIS when I started, but WVU did. And remember, I was working with the Brownfields Assistance Center, which was based at WVU, so they were able to get the maps for us.
So I just want to say, this is a great discussion about data-driven decision-making, right? So we started out with that at the opening session. All of the work that the city of Erie did is based on data, not because we like data, but data persuades. These guys took all the data they had, put it in written form, put it in short form, and brought it to their elected officials and got money. So I just want to say how wonderful I think this is, and feel free to ask any of us questions for the rest of the day, and we're happy to share whatever we know on this and other topics with you. So thank you so much. I don't know if you wanted to end with anything else, Shelby?
No, yeah, that was great. Thank you all, for being here. Thank you all for attending. Next up is lunch, and then the keynote's going to be at 1:45. So
Thanks for the great questions.